This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, welcome everybody to
all you, Clark. Yeah.
All right, thank you. Welcome everybody to meeting 5 of our CISA book club, February 8th, 2019. We've added some more questions here, so we're going to try to kind of go through this top kind of 30,000 foot view pretty quickly here so we can get into the meat of the questions. And anybody else sign up for the test, by the way? No?
I did.
Okay.
I did. Yep.
Okay.
April, I think it's April 19th or somewhere around there.
Okay, so Greg has, you have, I think Mark has, I'm not 100% sure about that. Not sure who else might have, but good. This is nothing, no changes on this slide. So we're now past week 4 into week 5, still on domain number 1, process of auditing information systems, kind of the second half of that chapter. Here's our full schedule.
Yeah,
Sherry,
we have a question for you guys. Yeah, we have a question for you guys. Clark is going to have to work for a living for several of these Fridays that are coming up. Can you believe we're going to actually assign him to work? And we're going to need to have somebody else take over his place for March 1st and March 15th, and possibly March 22nd. And we're wondering if we have any takers. So if we look at what the specialty is for that, March 1st, we're going to be talking about IT service delivery and infrastructure, systems hardware, systems architecture and software. Then on the 15th, we'll be talking about asset protection. And let's see here, on the 22nd, we would be talking about the rest of these, the network security controls, environmental controls, etc. So think about it, and if it's something that you might want to do, let us know. We'd love to have you participate with us, and we'll work with you on it. And you really do learn more when you teach than you do when you're just listening. So there's
Sherry,
my
I'll take week 11.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
All right, awesome, Greg. And I'll get with you and share some of the resources I was using to pilfer test questions.
Oh, great. Yeah, yeah. I saw you. Yeah, you had a bunch of different ones going.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, I thought the content, we kind of started off with governance, and for me, and I think that's probably going to be true with everybody else, and from what I was kind of reading online, that's kind of the hardest part. I think as we get deeper into this, a lot of this stuff is going to align a lot closer with some of the PCI and some of our direct experience. So quite frankly, I think it's a little easier material.
Yeah, one other thing too, Mr. High, since you have been so graceful to offer this for us, on that week, that is our last class week. You have some slides about how to take exams, things look. Why don't you add that to your presentation? I think that'd be good for us to look at the tips and tricks to taking a test.
Sure, I will do so.
Thank you.
Great idea.
And as we've kind of gone through the weeks here, we're trying to find the sweet spot of how many questions we should have on this. Obviously that's going to be dependent. The pace is obviously going to be dependent upon how much participation or discussion there is on each question. But the first time we did 20, and then we did, 10, and then we did 20, and then 25, I think, and now we're at 30. So we'll see if we can get all this in here. Anything else on the schedule, Sherry?
That's it.
You wrote Greg's name down real quick, right?
Oh, I got it in blood, yes.
Can't escape.
Right.
In ink.
And then, again, this is just hopefully a little bit of motivation to get that test, write the test before June 2019. The percentages are changing slightly, but we don't really have any other information about what else might be changing regarding the test. Just kind of the overview of the current test. Seen that? We all did our assignments, right? And then I think, I've kind of been a big fan of this book over the weeks, this ISACA test book. My mentors for this test were really a couple of folks at Adobe, and this is basically all they use. Although to be fair, they were kind of doing auditing and governance for a living. So, but this CISA book was the only resource they even used for the test, and they're both CISAs. So, if that helps any. And again, the wrong answers on this, I think, are just as valuable, if not more valuable, than the right answers are. And then that audit script site, you don't need to, I wouldn't recommend putting your real name and email address in there, because anything, you basically throw anything in there and it works. And then this is the second part of the chapter 3 from the Peter Gregory book, which is domain 1. And as we indicated last time, a lot of this material, especially at the end of this chapter, is really more definition based. You just need to, get some terms memorized, and we'll see that in the questions coming up here. And here we go. In performing a risk-based audit, which risk assessment is completed initially by the IS auditor? Again, when we go through these, what I would recommend you do, if you don't say anything out loud, just read it to yourself and just try to guess at the answer to make sure you kind of know where you are with these. Anyone want to take a stab at this?
It's kind of a confusing question. I mean, I would want the where'd we go?
Oh, sorry. I'm sorry. Can you see it again?
Yeah, it's so. Oh, we're on number 2
You're on
now.
the wrong one.
All right, I'm sorry. All right.
Which risk assessment is, wow. So, I mean, I would say, in the reading, it would be what's the biggest risk in an IS audit or whatever, and that would be detection. But I'm not really sure what they're asking.
Yeah, I thought this was a good question. I think the key word here is initially. So if we think which one of these are the most foundational here?
I'm with Jerry. I would see detection. Fraud would come later. Control would come later. I guess I don't really understand enough about inherent risk.
Yeah, think about it this way. Let's say that you haven't put any controls in place and you haven't really done anything yet. You're going to be performing this risk-based audit. The types of risks that you're going to find are inherent risks. If you go to the second slide, does it give you some of the discussion about inherent?
Yeah.
So it's what, it's independent, it's going to happen. So they throw this question out quite a bit. I've actually seen it in quite a few different places where they're really trying to figure out when you first start, what you're looking at is inherent. That's just probably one of the best ways to.
Yeah, another word you can look that you can kind of replace with inherent is natural.
Yep.
Good point.
And there's kind of the definitions for these. And again, this is one of those things where you really need to know these definitions. And on page 183 in the Peter Gregory book, so it basically defines each one of those types of risk.
That's a good question.
And yeah, this one's also a kind of similar to the first question. Aligns pretty well with the Peter Gregory book too.
But based on what we saw before, it was about business processes. So it seems although strategies drive processes in some way, but it doesn't necessarily define risk.
Yeah, I think you brought up a good point there. So I think when you're saying an auditor, is an auditor going to necessarily look at business strategies? So if I'm following your thinking, I would arrive at A. And so from the Peter Gregory book, we can see right here, business processes supporting infrastructure systems. So that aligns pretty well. By the way, none of these questions that we're using are from the Peter Gregory book. I think this question is a little bit tougher. I think it's pretty easy to eliminate choice D on here.
I'm going to go with, because of the fact it says control in the question, A.
Yeah, I thought this question was kind of tough too.
I think it's C.
Ding, ding, ding.
Yep.
It's very similar, actually, to what we talked about a minute ago, because it's saying there's no compensating controls. There's nothing in place.
Yeah, as Sherry indicated, there just seem to be a ton of questions in this area on all the practice test resources. I thought this was a good question. I think
B.
on this one,
I'd say B. Yeah, B as in Bob.
Yeah, I think it comes down on this one to distinguishing, or you can narrow it down, I think, to A and B pretty quickly, and then let's see what the answer is. I think Jerry said B. And from the Peter Gregory book, trying to align this question, talking about self-regulation, kind of, follows more into that. But I thought that was a good question.
Well, those process flows, I think, are pretty important. That whole narrative is almost like Rational Rose used to be, that whole stepwise piece.
You know what they're saying here, though? They're trying to distinguish between the normal auditor who does their internal audit or external audit or whichever it may be, and make them a facilitator to help the people, the process owners who are actually doing the assessment or the workshop. They're trying to push the ownership of the processes down to the process owners and trying to back out and letting them actually start to police themselves a bit. So that's what this one's about.
Okay, so it's somewhat a little outside maybe the audit role. Can we go back to that question? I don't mean to. So most effective for implementing a CSA, and so we're saying facilitated workshops. Would that be facilitated? I guess I'm not sure how it specifically relates to being an IS auditor. And is that the auditor says we should do facilitated workshops? Is that something that they actually, I'm trying to put it in the context of if I'm checking for a yes or a no.
Okay, I've got one for you. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, the most that's in caps, and then for implementing too. So when they're saying implementing, to me, that kind of eliminates data flow diagrams and narratives, because that's not really the actual assessment.
Oh, good point. Yep. Okay. I see what you're saying.
Go ahead.
Great. Thank you.
Sherry, do you have something you wanted to add?
No, that's okay. I think I was just going to add that. So if you're a process owner and you find that during audits you may have a patching problem, as an example, you may want the process owner who is in charge of the patching process to start taking more control over doing some self-assessment in their area to make sure that when they do the big assessment, it's not an issue. So they're remaining compliant and they're testing their own controls. So what they're saying there is let the auditor facilitate and help the guys who are actually out there on the ground, help them understand how to better police themselves before an actual audit occurs. So it's trying to separate the two.
Okay. That makes good sense.
And number 5 here, the decisions and actions of an IS auditor are most likely to affect which of the following risks. So here we're on the same theme. So when we're talking about decisions and actions, I think we can pretty much automatically eliminate A, since that's kind of the natural risk.
Yeah, I'd say control is what I'm thinking.
Is it? Wow.
So,
I got that one.
Can you go back to the question for a moment?
Sure.
So what's happening is they're concerned about an auditor missing something that might be material. So they're saying here the decisions and actions of the auditor could affect the detecting of something that's going on in your environment. There's a lot of questions in there about the auditor not detecting something material.
I see. Yeah. I was looking at it as an affirmative thing. What is their most affirmative thing as opposed to what their most potential for a gap?
Right. It's a weirdly asked question.
Yeah.
I think it's great that we're seeing these because I think they're all weirdly asked this way.
Yes, could be.
Yeah, I think on these risk types, I think it's pretty easy to either eliminate or include inherent risk. Control risk and detection risk, I think you really need to, get those definitions down and read the question carefully to make sure, to see how the question is trying to distinguish between the two. The risk of an IS auditor certifying existence of proper system and procedures without using an inadequate test procedure is an example of
a really bad question, because they're saying without using inadequate test procedure. But I think what they really are trying to say is without using an adequate test procedure, not an inadequate.
Yeah,
I
saw
think
that too. Oops. All right.
Yeah, I was going to say it was the same kind of thing. Failure to capture.
And this should smell real similar here.
We got the A going.
Yep. All righty. I think on this one of the answers definitely kind of stands out from the other ones.
Say discovery. Never heard of stop or go.
I think it's A.
Yes, correct. There's this definition for stop and go. That's also in the Peter Gregory book on pages 175 to 176.
I also came across this question in the CISA questions book, and I remember they specifically said that attribute sampling is useful when testing for compliance. So I remembered that phrase, which is almost verbatim what their question here is.
Yeah, they've got another kind of key term here on attribute sampling where they're basically, it's answering the question, how many? Number 9. Has to determine whether the last 50 new user requisitions were correctly processed. An example of I think this one's fairly easy to eliminate A and D on it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think keywords here are correctly processed. Does that imply?
Yeah, it's gonna be D.
Yeah.
Oh,
they're calling it compliance testing.
Well, I thought that's what you said. Yeah, it is compliance because it's making sure that people are compliant to a process that's currently going on. If you go back to the question for a moment. So they're making sure that the user requisitions were correctly processed. So it's like it's a process that's in place, and they're just going to test to validate that the process is going forward as it should be, that they're compliant with the business process as it stands.
Yeah, and you're really going to want to know how these are defined.
Wow, that one's just really confusing.
If you've got that ebook for the Peter Gregory already loaded on your computer, one thing that's kind of helpful too is just when you've got it pulled up in a PDF format, you can just use Adobe to do a keyword and find things pretty quickly.
This one's kind of like the one we talked about earlier, where the risk is based on the auditor. So it's whether they certify existence of, are they using an adequate test procedure?
So by what Sherry just mentioned, you can eliminate A because that's the natural risk, and that the auditor doesn't really have any effect on that.
I think you can eliminate D because it's not necessarily a risk to the entire audit. It's a risk against a specific test procedure.
Correct.
So certifying existence would mean detecting it to me.
Yes. We need the ding, ding, ding. Good job.
Ding, ding. I know. We're missing Sean here.
I know.
Again, there's those Peter Gregory, those definitions for these that you really need to make sure you have down.
It's almost a repeat question.
Yeah, it seems like.
I'd say A.
Yeah.
What's interesting to me is how many times they can ask the same thing in different ways.
Yeah. Oops. Sorry about that. On this one, I thought this was if you'd never known anything about risk assessments, I think you'd get this one right 10 out of 10 times. But this one is really easy to overthink because when you start looking at all the literature that goes along with risk assessments, there's a lot of stuff related to qualitative versus quantitative, and I think that you start thinking about along those lines. But then if you kind of group these things together between quantitative and qualitative, you basically have I think the bottom three would be more related to quantitative, and the top one would be closer to qualitative. So I think on this one, A kind of stands out from the other three.
And I think, the part of the keywords here are assessment versus audit. Because this implies a level of collaboration, if you will, versus just are you doing it or are you not?
Right. Yeah, I mean, this, even on the answer here, I think it's a little bit confusing because, I mean, there are things there's all kinds of literature on quantifying risks with formulas and everything else.
Yeah, the old balanced scorecard.
Yeah, and kind of going back to this. So with that in mind, still, I mean, if you're trying to eliminate the answers, I mean, these bottom three are pretty similar. The susceptibility of a business process to make an error that is material in nature, assuming there were no internal controls. Kind of gave you the answer on this one earlier. Key word here is nature.
Yeah.
I think this should be a pretty easy one.
I'll take C for 500, Alex.
Ding, ding, ding. You didn't. You didn't put that in the form of a question.
Yeah.
Tough crowd.
Damn it. Sorry, this computer's being weird. Which of the following is considered part of the CISA Code of Professional Ethics?
Perform the duties. Was it D? Yeah.
Yeah, it was D.
Yeah.
Which of the following is the test?
Think of a substantive test as being something that you're trying to validate that calculations are good, that you're getting down into the nitty gritty of it.
It seems A is talking more about policy, so that's the same thing with change management policy. Those seem to be a higher level than more fine grade substantive.
And D really isn't a test, but just kind of a historical review.
If I was sitting in the room, I'd probably select C.
Good job.
You would be right.
Right.
When an IS auditor performs a test to ensure that only active users have access to I'm not sure what they're saying here.
Another really badly worded question.
Yeah, this bank, I think the person who did this, English was not their first language, because there's some awkward language.
I think what this is trying to say is that only active users have access to an application.
Mm-hmm. It was not statistical. I think you're looking for, is it complying with an access policy?
Yeah, I think it's easy to eliminate C and D on this one. And the guess was A, and he gets it right again. You're ready to take the test.
Well, at least this part of it. The rest of it, I'm not sure yet.
With regard to confidence correlation, it can be said that and on these, I think you might run into a few of these where they try to trick you where high confidence basically allows for smaller sample sizes. On this one, I think it's easy to eliminate A and D, and then it kind of comes down to between B and C.
Well, see, if you look at D, how would they necessarily know controls are strong if you're trying to do a confidence correlation?
Yeah.
Well, and what's interesting is you've got two answers that go to that same first part of the sentence. if an auditor knows internal controls are strong. So my inclination is to go with one of those two, and now they're just trying to figure out whether it's going to be lowered or increased.
And I think if I were doing a PCI assessment, if I went in with a bit of knowledge that their sample sets were really kind of out of whack, I'd want to get a higher sample size. But I guess in either of these, I don't know how you determine where in the process you are making a confidence correlation. Because you have a small confidence correlation, or the internal controls are strong. I'm trying to figure out how you would know those things.
And I guess they're saying that if an auditor knows internal controls are strong, they're actually letting the auditor make a judgmental call there, or a judgmental test that the confidence coefficient could be lowered. They don't have to test as many because he knows that particular area is strong.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that comes back to if I relate that to, say, like a PCI assessment, and let's say they're using something like Puppet to control all of their Linux instances, right? There's no way to and they demonstrate the process and the tool and all that kind of stuff. Well, then your confidence is higher that that sample set of Linux instances they're all going to be identical, right? Because they're mirrored off the same image. There's no way to drift from the configuration. So you can typically go with the smaller sample size.
I guess, in that regard, Jerry, if we think about it in the context of PCI, when internal controls are strong, I'm trying to just get the sense of where this would fall in either scoping or selecting your sample sets. Because, we always come in and say, it's roughly 10%. Well, I think we're throwing numbers out that don't necessarily have an associated confidence coefficient.
I would agree with you.
Yeah, we're at 11:37 right now, so and we're a little more than halfway through the question. So all the feedback is awesome, but if anybody has a hard stop at the top of the hour here, otherwise I'm happy to go over here.
I'll shut up. Sorry.
No, this conversation about it has been really good. Thank you for participating like that.
Yeah, I think that's the best stuff we do here. Understanding the combination of which of the following two audit issues are essential concepts for planning the areas to be audited and the specific tests to be performed in a given audit. I think since we're talking about planning, I think B and C can be eliminated when they're talking about control selection. And I don't think D is a very good choice.
Yeah, materiality.
Leaves us with A. Yep. IS auditor reviewing a critical financial application is concerned about fraud. Which of the following sampling methods would best assist the auditors?
Discovery.
You're right.
Yeah. And there's that step from Peter Gregory on 175 to 176. Some of that stuff is fairly intuitive, but you definitely need to know it. Which of the following sampling methods would be the most effective to determine whether access rights staff have been authorized as per the authorization matrix?
There's a phrase I've never seen before.
Stratified mean per unit.
Per unit, yeah. Missed that one.
I hadn't seen that term before.
Attribute. Either. Yeah. I think you're testing for the attributes or the author. Yeah.
Yep. Good job. An auditor discovers evidence of fraud perpetrated with a manager's user ID. The manager had written the password allocated by the system administrator inside his or her desk drawer. The IS auditor should conclude that this question should be a gimme, I hope.
Always blame it on the assistant.
Yeah.
I'd say B.
Yep.
You're getting them all right today, Greg.
Yeah.
Well, it was a rough start.
I think this is a pretty good question. During a review of a customer master file, an IS auditor discovered numerous customer name duplications arising from variations in customer first name. To determine the extent of the duplication, the auditor would use, I'm thinking about variations in customer first names with duplicates. If I can use maybe Sherry as an example. Let's just say, for example, they've got a bunch of duplicate records related to Sherry, and one of them is SHERRI, another one is SHARRI, another one's SHRIE, and I'm sure Sherry's never run into that before.
Oh no, never.
So yeah. So when you're looking at that, you're thinking, what else can I do to kind of group those guys together? What else would be constant among those records that I can use to tag them all together?
Well, I guess it seems to me A and B are out. You're trying to identify it. So an audit software, and then it comes down to what would is it an address field or an account field? Is a customer name one of those two?
Yeah, and when we're talking about somebody's name, I mean, as far as like data, validating data input, I mean, you really couldn't do much beyond, just saying whether it's a number or a letter for a person's name. Although I guess maybe there's some like, Hollywood type that's got a number for his first name, but I would, throw that one out.
I'm thinking D.
And then on D, when you're talking about account field duplications, I mean, you're talking about types of accounts. I don't know that is really something you could necessarily group, the different versions of Sherry together. So the constant with the different versions of Sherry's is going to be the address, I think.
Okay. I was thinking the account would have all the information, but I think after hearing you explain that, you're right.
Yeah, I think I thought about that question a lot. I thought it was good, but it was something I really kind of had to think about. The IS auditor should use statistical sampling and not judgmental, non-statistical sampling when and on this
I don't
one,
like this question.
Yeah. On this one, B probably only exists if you're not sampling. I don't really think it's possible to avoid sampling risk. C is really auditing, and D should not be indeterminate, which leaves us with A. That's kind of a question you can kind of think yourselves in circles on, I think. I think this question is good in terms of choice elimination. What is the best audit technique to identify payroll overpayments for the previous year? And you're going to need to kind of, if you aren't familiar with some of these terms, you're going to need to know these, like integrated test facility and embedded audit module.
I would go with A. I mean, you just need data.
Well, when I'm reading that, what's the best objective to identify payroll overpayment? So it looks like there's for the previous year, so they're looking at historical tests. So I don't know that test data would be the best choice in that one.
And it could be very well that some kind of an automated test would work if you had something in the system, because it would have all the variables that it would need, and it would just give you a variable report.
Oh, I guess maybe an embedded audit module, kind of like log management, being able to pull historical data from some kind of embedded tracking.
On this one, it's real important to know the definitions, because one of the key words for embedded audit module is something that triggers something. And since the question is looking for the previous year, something historical, I think the embedded audit module is kind of after the fact.
Hmm.
And an integrated test facility, I think that's kind of in real time as well. And we're looking for, problems in the previous year. And so they're going generalized audit software. And so this is where that embedded audit module, where they're basically talking about detecting where it's something triggering. So I think the key delineation on that one is something that's there's going to be a real-time trigger on that one.
Is there a definition of gas? Is it a, I don't know, Microsoft product, or some other GRC tool like Archer?
That's a great question.
You mean which one that one would fall under?
Just what I've not heard of, other than within context of, say, GRC, what a generalized audit software would be.
Okay.
Like, is it a package? I'm not sure.
You're trying to correlate that to an actual real life product, right?
Yes. Yeah. Exactly.
Okay. Yeah. Good question. I'm not sure.
That's my homework for the night.
Yeah. You can give us a speech on that one when it's your day.
Okay. I'll talk about gas.
I looked this up, and actually it's talking about things like there are different audit softwares. There is Ops Audit, SOX Hub, just a whole lot of companies use to perform routine audits, and it's just literally a package you pick up off the shelf.
Okay.
Here's where we say we're assessors, not auditors, darn it.
Yeah.
Which of the following normally would be most reliable evidence for an auditor? I think this is a good question. I think you're going to see something like this on the test. I think the key here is when you're talking about most reliable evidence, and there's different variations of this question, which we'll talk about in a second here. But what's the most reliable?
I look at like B, and it's like, well, they can give me their assurance, but if they're giving me evidence, they may be obfuscating things.
Yep.
Same thing with D, reports supplied by line management. Again, they may be trying to obfuscate what's in the evidence.
And trend data is kind of worthless.
Yeah, yeah. So it almost seems like, an affirmation, it's almost like they are giving an affirmation of an account. So I'd say probably the closest. Okay.
So the other version of this question of the theme will have in the choices something to the effect of a, some internally written report, or another choice might be a system generated report. And even though they're both coming from the client, it doesn't have, like, for example, in that example, they wouldn't have an external audit as one of the choices, but it would come down to something where they made up, where judgment, or as you indicated, something else could come into play, or something that's, system generated. And in that example, I've seen those questions with the answer system generated. But on this one specifically, I think we've successfully eliminated the rest of the choices. So it's going to be A.
I like that idea, though, the system generated. That is, I think, an important point.
ISI value in a corporate network for possible penetration by employees. Which of the following findings would give the auditor the greatest concern? Yeah, actually, this seems like it should be a simple question, but I kind of was talking myself in circles a little bit on this one. I think I was making too many assumptions. So on this one, I think we need to be careful to not make too many assumptions here.
I'd say B and D would be the likely candidates, with D being probably the most impactful from a negative standpoint.
Ding, 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 ding.
You can never track who that is.
Yeah, you're killing it there. You want to take this one over, Sherry?
Sure. So you could possibly get a question like this. Now, the good news is, Clark, could you press next? That makes it a whole lot easier.
Yeah,
but again,
yes.
Make sure you know the acronyms. But so now looking through that, what do you think?
It's about mitigation. So I would say it's not about a single loss, because you're trying to mitigate across the solution. But if you're doing a CIA analysis, asset value is a big component. In essence, is it going to shut everything down at that? How valuable is that asset? I'd go D.
Actually, it's C, which I think is a weird answer for that.
I guess
so they're saying,
I can see. Yeah.
Yep. What is my exposure factor, and then how many times a year is it going to occur? So you can really get to what the amount would be for the risk.
It's kind of like a threat vector.
Yeah, there you go.
Victor.
Next.
Yeah. I've seen airplane too.
Okay, next one. Okay, so these questions come up so much that this is just kind of, let's go through these and just do them one by one. The answer is going to be one of the 7 answers on the right. So the very first one, an auditor is examining business records related to the creation of computer user accounts. While gathering samples, the auditor has noticed that several items are related to high privilege access. What sampling approach should the auditor take in this case?
Are we to match one to this paragraph to one of those 7?
You know what? They're not even. So this is a test that you're a question that you'll see, and there's so many of them, and they're so close. You just need to select an answer from the right.
But for each paragraph, so we just read that paragraph.
Right. So yes. So the answer that we're looking for would go with this first paragraph. So an auditor, forget what's the rest. Oh, it's okay. Forget what's below it. So just that they're examining business records, and they're noticing something. So if you're noticing something, that's kind of stopping the person, making them think, right?
Would it be variable?
Actually, no, it's judgmental. Because he's having to make a judge for whether or not he should do something else.
Judgment. Okay.
Yes. Next,
so can I ask?
Sure.
Can I ask a question? How do these types of questions appear on the actual exam?
I think they're all A, B, C, and D.
Okay. All right. Cool. Thank you.
Yeah. I just did this one because I wanted you to see the questions side by side and the difference in the ways that they ask questions about these particular methods. I thought it would be valuable for you to just kind of go down and see them this way. So an auditor is auditing a computer user account provisioning process, and after selecting a statistical sample, the auditor examines the samples to see how many requests were for administrative accounts. What kind of sampling is that? The key there is how many.
So statistical?
No.
How many?
How many? I've seen questions that are basically you're doing a statistical sample. How many? What kind of sampling would you do looking for how many there are? It's just worded a lot of different ways, and that's actually attribute. So in an attribute, they're looking for how many of that attribute did you find in your statistical sampling. The next one, an auditor is auditing an employee termination process. The auditor wants to select groups of samples until an exception is found. What type of sampling would be used?
Discovery.
Yes.
Ding, ding, ding.
And an auditor is auditing a purchase order process and needs to select individual purchases to audit. There are a small number of high-value purchase orders. Which sampling technique is best suited?
It's stratified.
That is correct. An auditor is reviewing a computer access provisioning process and is examining records. Because some of the records in this process are for the provisioning of administrative accounts, sound familiar? The auditor chooses to select more of those records to ensure that there were appropriate approvals. What type of sampling are they performing?
More records. I'd say stop and go.
No. So let me see, they're reviewing them. Because some of the records in the process were for administrative accounts, the auditor chose to select something more. So that auditor made another judgment call.
Judgment.
See, I got confused by this one and the first one because it also seemed like that was stratified sampling. So you're going to go select administrative accounts because they're higher risk.
Yeah, and I think what they're doing here is they're just examining records, but as they started doing that, in this case, the auditor realized that they were seeing a lot of administrative accounts. So because of that, they made a gut call and said, you know what, I'm going to look at more of these just to make sure that the approvals were correct, because most of these look like administrative accounts. So it's kind of using your intuition when you're doing an audit.
I'm sure glad I don't have to take this test again.
The next one, which sampling technique is used when an IS auditor is trying to find at least one exception in a population?
Discovery.
Yes, that is correct. Okay, next slide.
Next one.
This is Greg. I have to drop for a new meeting. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Greg.
Thanks, Greg.
This one.
Hey, are we almost at the end here? I've got
Yes,
another meeting as well.
I do too. I have to go catch a plane. So this question right here, these are very difficult. If you press the next page, go through those and then get down to the next slide. We won't actually go through these individually. I would say grab this chart. This chart has more on it than is in the Peter Gregory book. And we've got to know, which roles can perform some of the other functions and which cannot. So I would say just grab that chart. We can go over that next week if you would like, and you can go ahead and click next.
Is that in the book with all the questions in it, or is that a different book?
It's actually in a different one.
Okay. All right. I'll just take it.
It's actually in. Yeah, I can actually send it out if y'all would like. That might be the best way to do it. I'll put it in our Slack channel.
Please. Awesome.
Okay, then let's see here. So Clark, you want to take back over?
Sure. Yeah, I know we're kind of wrapping up here. Nothing's really changed on this slide for the most part. Just continue going over the questions. Please use the online resources for practice questions. As these practice questions come in from different sources, they'll approach the same questions from a different angle, which I think is really helpful because you can kind of see where they're at, what kind of answer they're after. And anybody else have any questions about the format or anything else we're doing here?
Clark, thank you very much for your time today.
Yeah, thank you. That was an awesome session. Yeah, thanks everybody. I'll get all this stuff posted as soon as we can get it done.
Thank you.
Bye bye.